and welcome. I'm Katie Hacker, and today author Ashley Bunting shows her style by combining leather cord with beads to create a hip bracelet. Hi, Ashley.
Hi, Katie.
Welcome.
Thanks.
This is cool.
Thank you.
I really like this design a lot.
Yeah.
And it has some secret ingredients.
Some leather cord. Yes, it's kind of hidden away there. I've been playing with this leather cording it's bolo leather, so what you've seen the Western style ties with forever. And what's kind of fun about it is that it's woven, so you can use these woven pieces of leather to insert your own little metal pieces and beads and kind of make a thin cord into a substantial piece bracelet.
That is really neat, and you use the pattern of the braid itself to add the wire and beads.
Yep.
And you can show us how it moves the vertebracelet.
This is my vertebracelet. So it actually is very flexible, which makes a really comfortable bracelet. And I just like how sturdy and movable the piece is.
Yeah. All right. So what do we need to get started?
So to get started, we have this 3mm bolo cord. And again, I said that it's woven, so you'll see that it has this different texture that you can, there's almost diamonds along the edge of the leather. So I'm just gonna cut a piece that is, you know, roughly my wrist size plus an inch or so. And you wanna use some nice scissors to cut this with because it is a thicker cord and you want a nice flat cut through your leather. Otherwise it's gonna mangle and then it's gonna splay out and not keep its nice structure of the woven leather.
So you use one that's specifically for a larger size cord.
Yes, exactly.
Great.
So I've got my piece of leather here, and now I'm going to cut my pins to insert into the leather. So I'm gonna take my wire cutters here, and this is 18 gauge wire, and I like to use kind of the duller, darker metals that kind of blend into the leather, but you could use that as an accent piece. In the silver bracelet over there, it's like a pinkish color wire, so you can do a bunch of different fun colors. So I'll just cut this here and get a little stock built up of my pins. And I like to use these cutters that catch, because then I'm not worrying about holding or flying wires.
I noticed that right away. I was about to say, oh, watch out. Make sure you cover your eyes. And
yep, so this will actually hold right onto that cutter as I build up my stock. So that is good there. Now I mentioned earlier that there are these diamond pattern that is created in the leather, and that's actually what we're gonna be looking for as the piece we're gonna lift to insert our pin into. So if you look along the bridge of this leather, you'll see diamond, 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 and you wanna be working in a nice straight line as you add your vertebrae pins.
Okay.
So just a couple down from the end, I'm gonna take this little pin. You can use an awl. This is actually from a pumpkin carving kit. So you can put your little template on, and it just is a really nice size, so I like working with it. But any sort of nail or awl or anything is great. 'Cause all we need to do is just create a little bit of space for that pin to sit into, like so.
Okay.
And I like to work in threes, so I'll just go along and put in 3 pins. So this kind of gives you the ability to move a little bit quicker as you move down the bracelet, since you're doing one step in succession and then the next step in succession.
Yeah, and by doing a few at a time, it makes it more efficient too.
Yes. So I've got 3 pins, and you can start to see that pattern of the diamonds pretty well, so you know right where you're attaching those little pins through.
Yeah, it does look like the spine too, little raised spots there.
And then I'm going to take my beads. Let me get a few of them over here. So I'm just gonna slide on my 3 beads onto those pins I just inserted. And take my flat nose pliers here.
And these are a heavy duty flat nose too.
These are they're really nice, precise edging to them is what I like about them. And they're a little bit thinner than a lot of the traditional flat noses that you see. And so that lets you get in closer to your work, but still get that really nice bite down that you want from a flat nose.
Okay.
So I'm just gonna stick the end of my wire into the jaw of my flat nose, and I'm just flattening this
so
wire.
you're making your own head pin, really?
Making my own head pin. And this is kind of nice if you're not someone that likes to do loops and you're always having a hard time getting them to match. This kind of eliminates that whole technique for you. You can just smash your wire.
Looks great.
So I've got this side done, and then I'm just gonna hop around and add my beads to the other side.
So it's kind of a paddle pin effect, really. On both ends, though. I like that.
Yep, so it actually creates, you're using that wire to attach, but you're adding a design element at the same time with getting a little bit of glint from that flattened wire.
Yeah, it looks good. You know what, when I just saw the picture of the piece, I thought that that was a crimp bead on the end.
Yeah, they look just like flattened crimp beads. So now I've got my other bead on this side, so I just want to make sure that everything's pushed tight, and then I'm going to, again, come in and flatten. And I like all those flats to be aligned. So one is here and one is here, not one is this way and one is this way.
Oh, okay. So you want them both to be facing the same plane?
Exactly. And you can choose to do that or not, whatever you like the idea of.
And that's cool that you can just flatten it while it's still attached. You don't have to cut it first, then try to flatten while you have a very short piece.
Right, right. So now I'm going to go back and trim. And again, this is helpful to have that little catch on my wire cutters. And I like to turn the other piece around and trim this side too, because it has kind of got like a little bit of warbly bits on the end. So
you're just cleaning it up?
Just cleaning it up. So that's the beginning, and I have a piece here that I've attached all of my pins to. And you want it to be just a little bit shorter than what would fit around your wrist.
All right.
Because the clasps that come with cord ends tend to add a little bit of length to your bracelet. So I'm just gonna kind of gauge how much is gonna actually fit into that cord end. And then I'm going to use my heavy scissors again to cut that piece. So it's always a good idea to give yourself a little bit of wiggle room. So start longer and you can always trim up later.
A little bit.
You just did all this work, you don't want to just muck it up right at the end.
Right. It happens.
So there's about where I want my cord to be. And I'm just going to see how that fits in there. About like that. So I'm going to take that over here and get my glue. And
so you could use any kind of industrial strength adhesive here.
Yeah, just any sort of an epoxy is going to be great. You do want to give it a nice glob because you're going to get a lot of stress at this point where the clasp is. And then this is just going to be fit on to your end eventually. And you're going to get a lot of spillage of your glue, so I always like to keep some paper towels around to kind of clean up, because you want to clean all of the glue before it dries. It's going to be nice and easy to smear off while it's wet, but once it dries, it's going to get globby and gunky.
So take care of it right away.
So you'll just clean up your glue end, and then you'll do the same for the other side.
Okay. Then you have a great variation to show us of this too.
Yes, so this is kind of the simple, easy, just smash your ends, quick version. They're kind of fun. You can build a bunch of them and wear them all together. And then I have kind of the bolder piece that goes into a little more work and is the more advanced bracelet.
All right, so we're going to take this to the next level.
Yes. So this is the next one we're going to do, and what's kind of fun is you get these little shimmies that you can attach onto your bracelet. So there's that there. And we're going to start with that same bolo leather, but this time we're going to double it. So you're going to bend it over and test. You need a little bit more length.
So about the length of your wrist again?
About the length of your wrist plus a little, because you just want to make sure you have some working room. and some room for your cord ends to attach.
Okay.
So I'm just going to cut my leather there. And we're later going to cut this actually into 2 pieces, but for stability, for working reasons, I like to leave it bent over so everything's kind of attached already and I'm not having a hard time holding on to all of my pieces.
Okay.
So we'll get some more pins prepared. And this time you want to be closer to 2 inches, about 1.5 to 2 inches for your pins.
Sounds good, and you can use 18 gauge for this again.
18 gauge again, this is using all the same leather and all the same wire, just different beads.
Perfect.
So I've got those prepared. And I'll get my little crystal rondelles.
Love those.
I like that they've started making them more in the like
Antique finishes. Me too, they look great.
And then I'm gonna be using that hematite again in a different color. So, slightly down from the end again, I'm gonna find my diamonds. And this time I'm going to be using the diamond from one side across to the diamond on the other side. So I'm just gonna insert this into that little leather piece. And then see how it lays right across. You can see where it matches up.
Yeah, so you just have to kind of adjust your cording so that you get that.
Right. So it should look like that. And then 1 pin through one side. Your crystal rondelle goes on.
All right, so this time you're making your spine with the crystallized.
Yes, so we'll have a nice little crystal line down the center. And then I will add my hematite to one side. And this time I'm going to be making that simple loop. So this is a great way to practice your loops. I like to just trim the very end of my wire to make sure that it is perfectly flat before I start making my loop. I'm gonna go, you want a substantial size loop here because you're going to be feeding the leather cord through. So depending on what kind of round nose you're working with, you wanna make sure that you're not right at the very end making a tiny little loop.
Okay, so just test to make sure your loop is big enough to fit over your cord.
Exactly. So I'm just gonna roll my wrist and reposition and roll a little bit more until my wire end meets the shaft of the wire. And then I'm going to just bend back a little bit so my loop is sitting right on top of the pin, not off to one side.
Everybody has a different method for those basic loops.
And I do it differently depending on the project. This one I do the cut and then the roll. When I make earrings, I usually leave the wire and then trim at the
cut
end.
it after.
So I'm just gonna repeat that same step on the other side. And I, again, do like to trim first, and I usually use my finger width as kind of a guide.
Me too.
So I keep this, the bead placed in almost about the middle of my finger, and then I'm trimming at the edge of my finger.
Okay.
And you'll just kind of get used to what works for you, what is
It's
your...
yeah, practice, definitely.
And then I'm going to roll my loop and then bend it back. And you want these, you can see mine are a little wonky, you want them to be aligned again on the same plane because we are going to be feeding that leather through these loops, so you want it to be a straight line. So there is your first vertebrae, your first pin. And then we're going to again look for our diamonds, and we're skipping a diamond in between so we have enough space for that crystal rondelle to sit.
Okay, so depending on what beads you're using, you could adjust that spacing.
Yep.
And just use the braid as your guide.
So I've got my next placement there. My pin will go in, my rondelle will go on, and then my pin will go through that leather again. And
This is a great way of thinking about different kinds of connections too.
yeah,
You know, I think it's great to use your cording as a guide and then coming up with all the different ways that you can embellish it with adding beads and wire. I mean, this is a super simple technique, but there are a lot of, I could see a lot of different ways you could go.
yeah, that's kind of how I tend to work, is I'm very material driven. So once I find a material, I want to find, okay, what else can I do with it? What are the properties of this material that I can use to my advantage, kind of? So this has that woven leather that I was like, this is a perfect base to build off of. What can I do with it?
Right.
So I've just done my loop on that side. I'm gonna trim again. Like I said, I kind of place my bead in the middle of my finger and use the edge of my finger as my length guide. And then I'm going to roll that loop down and then bend it back just a little and adjust so everything's straight. So this is going to continue on until, I usually do about 14. That's
Okay.
a good length for my wrist. You might need more, you might need less. And
So you can measure as you go along. Look
Right.
at that. Looks great.
looking magic.
I know. It's amazing.
So that's going to be set aside, and I've completed the beads that I'm going to attach on one side so you can see what it's going to look like. You could always leave this with just those loops. That's kind of a fun
Yeah, you
look
could attach
too.
some dangles or charms or
Right.
something else too if you wanted to.
Or I've been thinking about doing a chain and then doing something off that chain. You can do lots of different layers of textures and beads and materials with this sort of technique. So I'm going to go ahead and attach my beads to the other side. I'm going to cut a piece of leather, and again, my really specific measurements about here,
Right.
and cut that. And I'm going to tie a knot as a stop so it doesn't pull through my loop. And this is just a simple knot. And you probably want to grab and really pull that tight. And you could even put a little dab of glue in there so your knot doesn't come undone.
Yeah.
Leather
Just
can be a
extra
little
security.
slippery.
Just extra security.
And then I like to take the end of my leather and cut it at an angle so it goes through my beads really easily. These are big holes. You shouldn't have a problem, but it does, that tiny little slip makes a huge difference. So I'm going through my first loop. Then I'm going to slide on a big holed brass bead, my next loop, and continue this process down the length of the bracelet.
I love the way it looks when it's done too. And you do get that shimmy of the beads in between.
Yeah, it's just kind of nice to have movement, especially the leather tends to be a little bit stiff, which is nice. It makes it a really solid piece. But this gives it just like another little element of something fun.
Sure.
And so this one here shows you knotting off the end. I'm just gonna bring this guy over. You can always bring in the leather and put it right into the end of your clasp.
Oh
too.
yeah, so if you wanted to glue all the pieces in. And you did mention for this one you would cut this before you glue it in.
So this is gonna be cut right here, and we're gonna use the same measurement technique that we used on the simpler bracelet. So these are gonna be pushed together. We're gonna see how well this will fit in, and this will be glued into the end of this cord. And it just depends on what kind of cordon you're working with, how you want to glue it, and how you want to attach your different leather pieces.
Yeah, I think that looks great. And you know, one of my favorite things about this piece is that you use this natural dyed bolo, so it has kind of that variegated look. It really brings all these colors together. And you have such a great eye for color.
Thanks, I love color.
This. Yeah, this is a great project. Thank you so much for bringing extra variations too.
Thank you.
Gives us a lot of ideas for expressing our style.
Thanks.